Well, what a weekend. What an amazing time that was. And it is our first week back after Revive 2019. And I don't know about you, but I had an amazing time. I am so glad I was able to be a part of it. And just out of curiosity, how many of you guys were there on Revive last week? All right, nice. So a decent amount of you guys. And so if you were there, you know just how much fun it was, just how impactful of an experience it was, and you got to experience what that weekend was like. For those of you that couldn't make it, I am sorry that you missed out. I hope you put it on your calendar for next year, because it is not something that you will want to miss. And so real quick, for those of you that weren't there, I want to just kind of recap through real quick some of the lessons that you got to hear during that retreat. And it started off on Friday night with Miss Diane giving us an amazing lesson, and she introduced the theme of the retreat, which was the reckless love of God for us, just like that song that we just sang, the song that we sang so many times while we were at North Bay. And that idea is that God will pursue you no matter what. We talked through this parable of the lost sheep, in which there's this shepherd who has 100 sheep, and one of them goes missing. And in an amazing display of his radical love for us, that shepherd chases down that one sheep because he so desires that not even one sheep gets lost. And of course, in that parable, Jesus is the good shepherd, the shepherd who chases us down no matter where we've been, no matter what we've done. And we are the sheep. We're the sheep that has wandered away, and somehow along the way we got lost. But Miss Diane told us time and time again during her message that God is pursuing you. That there is nothing you could ever do. There is no past too dark. There is no sin too great. There is no distance you could run from God that would keep him from pursuing you. But she also introduced us to this idea that maybe in all of our wanderings, maybe in all the things we're chasing after in life, maybe in all the things we're striving for, maybe, just maybe, that while God is pursuing you, maybe, just maybe, you're pursuing him too. And then on Saturday morning, I taught, and we had a lesson where we went back to that parable of the lost sheep, and we asked, if we are the sheep, well then where are you going, little sheep? And we talked about this idea that your direction will determine your destination. Your direction, not your intention, will determine your destination. So where you are going in life will determine where you end up. And we talked about how this is easy to grasp when it comes to driving, that if I head towards Frederick, I know I will end up in Frederick. But for whatever reason, so often we live our lives as if this isn't true. That we can live our lives moving in a direction towards a person that is different than the person we were supposed to become, and yet somehow we think we're still going to end up where we need to be. But our direction, the choices we make every day, the direction we're heading in will determine the person we become. And then on Saturday night, I think so many of us, we found ourselves, as Thomas described, like a person standing on the edge of a pool, wondering if we should dip our foot in, wondering whether we should really take that next step. Like over the course of the weekend, we have this sense that maybe God is calling us to start doing something or stop doing something where we're really just not sure. But then Thomas introduced us to this idea that when God's love is shown, we can't help but get up and go. So he asked us, what is your get up and go? What do you need to start doing to become the person that God always created you to be? What do you need to stop doing to become the person that you were always created to be? What is your get up and go? And I think for so many of us, whether it's on a retreat or whether it's otherwise, we often find ourselves in these times where we get clarity on our lives, we get clarity on who God is and who we were meant to be and what he is calling us to do. And we make these big decisions. And maybe on Saturday night for you, after a weekend of talking through the messages with your small group and really just getting to disconnect and get clarity on where you're at, you decide, I'm going to start doing this, I'm going to stop doing this. Maybe for the first time, I'm going to take my spiritual life seriously. Maybe I'm going to move in this direction. We make these big promises and these big commitments that I think we have every intention of keeping. And then Monday morning comes. And we say, I can do this. I'm going to push through it. I've got this. It's not going to be like the other retreats. I can do this. I'm going to keep these promises I made because now I see things clearly. And then Tuesday comes. And it's hard. We're back in our old environment with our friends who are still haven't had an experience like ours, and they're still moving in that direction, but now we've decided we're going to move in a different direction, and it's hard. And Wednesday comes. And we begin to struggle. I don't know if I can keep these promises. And Thursday comes and Friday comes. And by the weekend, maybe we've broken this promise we've made to ourselves and God so many times that we wonder if we should just quit. Maybe that wasn't me. Maybe that was just an emotional decision. Maybe I can't do it. Maybe I'll just wait till next retreat. Maybe that's not me. And I think in that moment, we find so many of us asking ourselves, should we just quit? Because we made these big promises and we've gone back on them, and God must be disappointed in us. We've let him down. I can't possibly even think about trying to get back. And during my message on Saturday morning, I introduced this idea that none of us are sitting still in life. That in life, it's like being in the ocean with a current that is moving us away from the person we were always meant to be. And I think sometimes we get caught up in that current and we move away from where we're supposed to be, and we wonder, how could I possibly get back to where I'm going? Maybe I should just quit. Because things are hard. And those commitments we made, they're not easy to keep. And we wonder if we can even do it. But we're not alone in this. See, this isn't a new thing. This isn't something that you are going through for the first time and you're going through alone. No. You see, 2,000 years ago, one of Jesus' closest friends and followers, a guy named Peter, who I talked about in my message on Saturday, who was the guy who always wanted to be the first to do things. He was diving in head first. He was all into this Jesus thing. He was the first disciple to say, Jesus, you are the Messiah. When they were eating the Last Supper, he was the disciple that said, Jesus, I will never, ever leave you. He made these big promises. I will never, ever leave you. I will always stick with you. I'm sure, just like you, just like me, he had every intention of keeping that promise. But when Jesus looked at him after he said that, the Last Supper, he just, oh, Peter, you have no idea. See, because before the rooster crows, before morning even comes, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter would say, no, Jesus, not me. No, I'm intending on keeping good on this promise. I will never leave you. And then later that day, in the Garden of Gethsemane, the temple guards come to arrest Jesus. And I imagine Peter's waiting for Jesus to miraculously escape, and then he doesn't. And all of a sudden, Peter's wondering, what has he gotten himself into? The environment in which he made those big promises, the environment in which he was all in, has now changed. Just like how when we leave the retreat or we leave those times when we have clarity and everything seems easy and everything makes sense, and then it gets hard. And later that night, he'd be sitting in the courtyard of the temple watching the trial of Jesus. And someone would come up to him and say, hey, Peter, aren't you one of Jesus' followers? And he said, no, not me. No, that's not me. I'm sure in that moment he felt like a lot of us feel after we break that promise for the first time. We go, oh, how did I do that? But then we say, I've got this. Next time will be different. I messed up, but I'm going to keep going. And a little girl comes up to him and says, hey, aren't you one of Jesus' followers? And he says, no, not me. No. And the second time he denies Jesus. The thing he said he would never, ever do has happened twice now. And then later that evening, for a third time, someone comes up to him and says, hey, didn't I just see you in the garden with Jesus? He goes, no, not me. In an effort to save his own skin, he denies Jesus for the third time. The rooster crows, and it happens just as Jesus said it would. But frankly, in the story of Peter, in the story of one of Jesus' closest friends and followers, a guy who we actually get to read about a decent amount in the New Testament, this is not the interesting part of his story, at least to me. Because the fact that he messed up, the fact that he failed, the fact that he broke his promises, doesn't make him a failure. Doesn't make him a mistake. It makes him human. Just like you. And just like me. You see, those times that you've already gone back maybe on those promises that you said that you would never break. Those things that you said, I am done doing forever, and that you've already done again. Those things that you said, I'm going to start doing this, and I'm committed. I will always do this, and then you haven't. It doesn't make you a mistake. It doesn't make you a failure. It makes you human. What I care more about is what comes next. That's what I care more about in the story of Peter, and that's what I care more about in your story. What comes next? Because if you haven't broken those promises yet, you will. But what comes next? And you see, as the story goes on, after Peter has denied Jesus 3 times, Jesus would go to the cross where he would breathe his last breath. He would die and be buried. And for 3 days, he would stay in that tomb. But then on the 3rd day, he would rise from the grave. He would begin appearing to his disciples and to hundreds of people over the course of the next 40 days. And one of those occasions, we find at the end of John, a document written by one of Jesus' other closest friends and followers, one of the friends of Peter, who was there that day, that he records this time when Jesus appeared to his disciples. And it kind of acts like an epilogue to the book of John, because in John chapter 20, the whole book climaxes. Jesus has risen from the dead. Everything is great. And then we just have this very small, intimate picture in John 21. Jesus with his disciples one last time. And in John chapter 21, Peter is out with the other disciples, and he's back to doing what he's good at. He's back to doing what he knows. He's back to his old life. He's back out fishing. Him and the other disciples, they've been out fishing all night. They haven't caught anything. And morning is now coming, and they hear a man call to them from the shore, and he says, "Hey, have you caught anything?" They say, "No." He says, "Why don't you cast your nets to the other side?" And they do, and they catch 153 fish on that next dropping of the net. But even more interesting than that is that upon hearing the voice of the man calling from the shore, who was their friend Jesus, Peter, who had just denied Jesus, who had just broken the promises he said he would never break, who had done things he couldn't have imagined he would ever do, rips his cloak off, jumps in the water, and swims back towards the beach, because he knows that what waits for him on the other side is not a reprimand, is not Jesus pointing his finger, asking him, "How could you?" He knows that he will be welcomed home with open arms from Jesus, just saying, "Peter, come home." And then what happens next is they simply just eat breakfast on the beach. What just a beautiful picture of the guys just hanging out, enjoying just being with Jesus one last time. And they sit on the beach around a campfire eating fish that morning. And then after that, John records a conversation that Peter and Jesus had. A conversation I imagine Peter was a little nervous about, because what is Jesus going to say to me after I've done things I said I would never do? After I've broken the promises I said I would never break? He probably doesn't want anything to do with me. In John chapter 21, we see this conversation. It starts in verse 15. And it says, "When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?'" And you could take that in 2 ways. You could say more than these, as in more than the other disciples, or more than these, as in more than these fish, more than this old way of life for you, more than your comfortable way of living. Do you love me more than that? In either way, Simon Peter responds, "Yes, Lord," he said. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The 3rd time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And understandably, what comes next, it says, Peter was hurt because Jesus had asked him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." You see, here's just a simple idea to hold on to real quick. Jesus never once asked a question so that he could find out the answer. He already knew the answer. Jesus wasn't asking the question as if he was wondering, "I wonder if Simon loves me." He knew. Jesus was asking that question so Simon could hear himself say it. He was asking that question so Simon could remind himself of who he is. You see, in that conversation, Jesus had every reason to look at him and say, "Peter, what have you done? You said you would never do that." But he just asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Not so he could know, but so that Peter could know. "Yes, I do love you. Yes, that's who I am. Not the person who denied you. I am that person. Yes, Lord, I love you." And then Jesus doesn't say, "Really?" Because it doesn't look like it. "Really? Because you denied me 3 times. Are you sure you love me?" It doesn't look like it. No. He just points him back towards the person he created him to be. He said, "Yeah, I know you love me. Just do the thing I created you to do. Feed my sheep. Take care of my sheep." You see, Peter, he was renamed from Simon by Jesus with the name Peter, which means rock. And I imagine in this moment, Peter's wondering if I am still that rock, because I don't seem that steady. I don't seem that steadfast. But Jesus is saying, you're still the person I created you to be. Just go do the thing I created you to do. This isn't about telling you what you've done wrong. This isn't about dwelling on your past. This isn't about the fact that you've messed up. I knew you were going to mess up. And your mistakes, they don't make you a mistake. Your failures, they don't make you a failure. They make you human. So why don't we just restart and you go do the thing that you were always created to do? I feel like that's what Jesus has to say to us. He said, I knew before I ever created you that you would struggle, that you would have these hardships. But just keep moving. I'm not here to tell you that you've messed up. I'm not here to tell you you've let me down, because here's something that I think some of you need to hear this morning. You have never, ever let God down. God's doing just fine. He's doing just fine. He's just saying, come home, my child. Come home. I know you've messed up. I don't hold that against you. We're not going to define you by your past. We just come home. Let's just point you back towards the person that you always were created to be. I know you've messed up. But that's not what's important here. What's important is what's next. How are you going to follow up with that? You see, even after this, I imagine it could have been easy for Peter to just give up. God, I'm not the person you think I am. I'm not Peter. I'm not that rock. I'm the fisherman. I'm not cut out for this. I don't know what you were thinking, God. Maybe I should just throw in the towel. But he doesn't. He doesn't. What happens next is about a month later, Peter would stand in front of a huge crowd at the Feast of Pentecost when immigrants flood into the Jerusalem area from all over the world, and he would preach a message in which 3,000 people in one day would come home. They would come home and they would begin to follow Jesus, sparking the beginning of the Jesus movement after his death, the beginning of the early church, something that would change the world. Because he didn't quit. He didn't allow his past mistakes to keep him from going towards the future that Jesus was calling him to. And if what's more important for us is what's next than what we've messed up or the promises we've broken, then I think we can learn some things from Peter about how to push past our broken promises and towards the future that God always called us to. You see, because even in this story, there's some things I noticed about Peter that he's already doing right, that's already setting him on the right track to go towards the person he was always meant to be and do the things that God created him to do. And the first thing I notice is who he's with in this story. You see, after we mess up, after we start drifting away from the person we're supposed to be, I think it's so easy to surround ourselves with the people who tell us, that's okay. Why don't we just keep going that way? You were never cut out for that. That's not where you need to be. Why don't you just keep coming here? But rather, Peter surrounds himself with the people that I imagine would have been the hardest to be around in that moment. Because he had to look the guys in the eyes who would realize what he had done, the lies he had told, the denials he had made, and he had to go back to them. But they were also the people who were going to point him towards the version of himself that he was created to be. They were going to remind him, you are not Simon, you are Peter, you are the rock that Jesus created you to be, and you have things yet to do. And he was around the people that were going to speak life into him. And here's the thing. In our lives, the people we surround ourselves with, the voices we allow in will determine what comes out of us. Show me your friends, and I'll show you your future. Show me your friends, and I'll show you your future, because the people you surround yourself with, the people you allow to speak into your life will shape who you become. And I'm not saying you can't have non-Christian friends, but I am saying be careful what inputs you allow into your life. Be careful the voices you allow to get in your own head, because it will determine who you become. Show me your friends, and I'll show you your future. And Peter decided to go back to the people who were going to point him towards the person he was always meant to be. But there's more than that. See, the second thing I notice is that when he hears Jesus calling out to them, what I think so often happens is after we've broken those promises, all we want to do is hide from God because we think he's just going to tell us how much we've messed up. We're scared because it will just remind us how far we've drifted, and we don't want anything to do with that because we don't want the guilt and shame that comes from knowing we've broken the promises we said we would never, ever break. But rather than turning, rather than moving away from Jesus when he heard his voice, he threw off his cloak, jumped in the water, and swam back fast as he could into the loving arms of Jesus, who wasn't there to tell him, how could you, what have you done? He was there to tell him, just come home. He was there to remind him of who he was created to be. He was there to remind him of who he really was. And you see, I think so many of us, we allow the guilt and shame of breaking promises that we said we would never break, of doing things we said we would never do, of not doing the things we said we would start doing, to keep us from growing, to keep us from taking that next step, to keep us from jumping into that pool, to keep us from going in the direction that we were always meant to go in. I'm here to tell you today that guilt and shame have no place with a God full of grace. Shame, no place with a God full of grace. Guilt, no place with a God full of grace, because that sense of guilt and shame, it comes from this idea that we think we've fallen short of some standard that God has set for us and he's disappointed in us. But the Christian life, it's not about living up to some standard. It's about recognizing that we can't, but Jesus can, and we are walking into his loving arms, and he's just saying, come home, my child, and he's just pointing us back towards who we were meant to be. It's not about living up to this standard and feeling bad when we don't. It's about just moving in that direction. Just keep going in that direction. As Grant encouraged us on Sunday morning of the retreat, just keep swimming. Just keep going towards the person you were created to be. Just keep moving and doing the things that you were created to do. And third, and finally, and perhaps the most important, is after we break those promises, after we mess up, after we feel ourselves sliding away from where we're always meant to be, you've just got to keep pushing. We just got to keep going. Because had Peter given up, and he had every reason to, who knows what would have happened to those 3,000 people a month later who decided to change their life and begin following Jesus? Who knows what would have happened to the early church that would go on to shape the world as we know it? Who knows what would have happened had he decided, that's not me. I can't do it. I've shown that I'm not capable of it. But even when you think you can't do it, even when you say that's too hard, even when you say, but my friends, they're not doing that, even when you say no one else is going in that direction, even when you say, I don't know if I'm that person, I don't know how I could, even when you think you can't do it, push through it. Even when you think you can't do it, push through it. Even when you say, that's not me, even when you say, God, I don't know why you're calling me to that because that couldn't possibly be me. Even when you feel like that's not me, you choose who you will be. Who else gets to say who you will be but you? Even when you feel like that's not me, you choose who you will be. You decide your future, not the people around you who tell you you can't, not yourself who tells you you can't. You decide who you will be. And recognize that God is calling you to a version of yourself that is bigger than yourself and better than you could ever imagine. He's just saying, follow me. Just keep moving in this direction. It takes perseverance and it will be hard. There will be days when you go, I don't know if I can do it. But even when you think you can't do it, push through it. You see, in life, all of the best things, all of the best experiences, whether it's spiritual or whether it's just a little thing, all of the best things in your life will come on the other side of challenges, will come only through perseverance. The times when you want to quit, the things that are on the other side of that are the best things in your life. Nothing that is worth doing will come easy to you. The things that are worth chasing after will make you want to quit. I remember a couple years ago, I decided I want to take up snowboarding. I was in 10th grade, and all my friends snowboard, and they're like, it's going to be great. And I was like, well, if you fall, it's just snow. How bad can it be? And the big thing at my school was we had a ski club. And every Thursday, we would send like 3 or 4 buses full of kids up to Ski Liberty, and we'd all go snowboarding. And it just so happened that I was the only one of my friends who had never done it. But I was like, I got this. It can't be that hard. And I remember on the first day spending much more time on my butt than on my board and feeling like one giant bruise by the end of it and thinking, I will never, ever, ever do this again. This is horrible. And then I remember my friends, the people I was surrounding myself, looking at me and saying, no, you don't quit. You've got this, Austin. Just keep going. I remember them looking at me and saying, no guilt, no shame. We've all been there, Austin. That's how it starts. You've got this. And telling me, I know you think you can't do it, but just push through it. Just keep going. And I'm so glad I did. Because I remember weeks later looking back and gliding down the mountain and having the time of my life and going, I almost quit because it was hard. I almost quit because it hurt. I almost quit because I didn't think I could do it. What was I thinking? All the best things in your life, all the experiences worth actually living for, they will come on the other side of your biggest challenges. And the single thing, the single most important thing in your life, becoming the you were always meant to be, will take a whole lot of perseverance. It will take pushing through it. It will take coming to times when you want to do nothing but quit. When you want to say, this isn't me. It'll take pushing through it. take keeping going. It will take you saying, I can do it, and keeping going and moving and saying, I know it looks hard. I know I have to swim upstream to get there. I know the current is pulling me away from this, but I will keep moving in that direction because that's what I was created to do. But I think for some of us, we come to situations like this. We feel ourselves drifting away, and we look at the paddle back and we look, that looks really hard, and frankly, I'm not sure it's worth it. I know, Austin, I hear you saying that your best life is on the other side of these hard things. I know you say that your best life is on the other side of God's go. I know that you say if you live your life following after Jesus, you will feel more alive, you will feel more full of purpose than anything else. But Austin, I'm just not sure I'm buying it. Because I tried that. Didn't see people trying it. I don't know. Doesn't really seem worth it. Everything else seems pretty fun, but that, I don't know. I think we have this desire that overnight, when we start following after the person that Jesus created us to be, when we start following Jesus, when we start moving in that direction, we have this desire that everything would change. That our life would get so much better, that we would just sprout up and grow so much, and that we would change, and everything would be great. Overnight. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with bamboo trees. But bamboo trees, if you ever see them, they can take over entire forests in what seems like an instant. They're an invasive species, and they just sprout up and grow so fast, and they cover so much land, and if you plant them in your yard, soon your whole yard will be taken up by bamboo trees, and it happens overnight. Or at least it seems like it. You see, because with bamboo trees, for 5 years after those seeds go in the ground, nothing happens. For 5 years, it takes consistent sunlight, it takes consistent water, it takes consistent nutrients growing under the ground, it takes hard work and consistency for 5 years, and nothing happens. Not a single one of them will break ground in that 5 years. And then in 5 weeks, they can grow up to 90 feet after 5 years of doing nothing. And I think that's us. I think for so many of us, we want that to happen overnight. But my question for you is, what could you look like in 5 years if you kept pushing after the things that you know you're supposed to go after? If you actually kept those promises that you've made to yourself and to God, what would happen to you? What would you look like in 5 years? If you continued along that path, if you did the hard work, if you stayed consistent, what could you look like? For some of you in 5 years, you'll be almost graduated college. And in 5 years, you could look back and see all the lives you've impacted and see how much better situated you are to go into adulthood, and you could see that you are on the path to live the life that you were created to live. But it might not change next week. It might not change next year. But one day, you might look back and see a forest of impact that you've made. You might look back and say, it was worth it. No, it didn't happen next week. No, it didn't happen next year. But one day you will realize that the consistent things you put into your life, the patterns you've created, the people you've surrounded yourself with, the things that you've pushed through, will all be worth it. Who could you be in 5 years? How could your life be different? How many other lives could you have changed? All because you said, even when I think I can't do it, I'm going to push through. What could that look like for you? Because I believe more than anything that God has a plan for each and every one of your lives. I believe that God is pointing you towards a version of you that is better than you could have ever imagined. And it is my dream that will keep me up at night thinking of what you all could do if you just followed through. If you just kept going. The impacts you could have, the people in your school that you could change, the people in your family that you could change, the amount of change that could happen in you, the things that you could do if you just followed through. If you just kept pushing. There's nothing that excites me more than that. And you won't find people who believe in you more than your leaders that are in here. And if you need people speaking into your life, like we talked about, the people that are going to point you towards the version of you you are always meant to be, you already have such a great system of those people. People who want nothing but your best and who believe in you more than you could ever imagine. I just want all of you to dream of who you could be if you followed through with this. Who you could be if you kept moving in the direction that you know you're supposed to go in. If you decide to stop doing those things or start doing those things. That's what I dream of for each and every one of you. And even when you think that you can't do it, which will happen, when you have those days where you're like, I don't think I can go any further. I'm not sure this is me. I think the plans God has for me, the things you're calling me to start or stop, I think that's beyond me. Even when you think you can't do it, push through. Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you. Thank you so much for bringing us here this morning. We thank you for what you are doing in the lives of these students, God. God, I thank you for each and every one of them, and I thank you for the plans and the purpose you have for their life and the version of them that you are calling them to be, God. I thank you so much for your love for each and every one of us. That no matter how hard we push away, no matter how far we try to run away, no matter what we do or have done, that you pursue us no matter what. God, we love you, and we praise you, for it's in your Son's name that we pray. Amen.